Okay, I have the pleasure of introducing my friend, Linda Bernardi. She is a relentless disruptor, a serial entrepreneur, and a startup investor with over 15 years dedicated to organizations chartered to identify, explore, and remedy issues that women face in technology, and to remove barriers and promote women around the globe. She is the founding board member of the Anita Borg Institute for Women in Technology. She is the Chief Innovation Officer of IBM, Cloud, and Internet of Things. She is the author of Provoke, which is available here today and also on Amazon, a book about disruptive innovation. She is founder and CEO of Connectera, Inc., the first enterprise RFID middleware company. She's a columnist for the Washington Post, board member and advisor of Astia, an activist and sought-after speaker on global matters relating to women. She's a yogi, a diver, a wife, and a mother, and my friend, Linda Bernardi.
Hey, nice. We're going to do this together. Let's go back to the first slide if we could. All right. Hello, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. Before I get started, I'd like to thank Wendy. Wendy and I met only this weekend, but I do feel like I've known her for a very long time, a sign of true friendship. So, first of all, I'd like to ask the men in the audience to please stand up. So let's give a round of applause. All right, thank you. And this is important because my dream is at some point we're coming to a women's conference with half the room full of men. So our dialogues will not just be among ourselves, but with those with whom we want to create change, right? So take this opportunity whenever there's a women's event, invite them. And I'll tell you, the reaction when you tell a man, do you want to come to a conference of 1,000 women? The question is, what time do I pick you up, right? So the second thank you is to all of you. So can we have a round of applause to all of you who have made the time to come out here today? I really, really appreciate it. And I just want to make sure that I have some water here. That I can, oh, this one? There's a glass underneath here, hold on. Okay. All right, thank you very much. Okay, I'm Linda Bernardi, good morning. My role is Chief Innovation Officer at IBM for IBM Cloud and IoT. My job is my passion. It's about disrupting a pretty big company, and it's also to figure out the future vision, the technology vision for cloud and IoT. So that's what I'm at IBM to do. And my Twitter handle is there, a lot more information to come. So with that, if we can get this to work. Let me tell you about myself. And I want to pick 4 instances in my life that has to do with my passion of disruption. One is right out of graduate school, I joined BBN, Bolt Brannick and Newman, a think tank. We developed stuff that didn't exist. So as a result, we innovated. We were disruptors. The stuff we developed didn't exist. So that was an amazing 10 years of building things. So I grew up thinking that was pretty normal, right? Because we weren't a product company. We got to sit down, we got to think and build stuff. Then in 2000, I had a dream that barcodes are pretty mundane, right? In order to get a value out of a barcode, you actually have to want it, as you do in the grocery store. You must have thought by now that you can just go out, right? That we could do this otherwise. RFID replacing barcode will allow that. Now that was hugely disruptive because at the time that I started my company in Boston, tags were expensive, the technology wasn't there, nobody wanted to do it, and everybody asked us to leave, and they called me crazy. 5 years later, over 3,700 of the world's largest companies had deployed our technology. So when you're a disruptor, it's really important to be crazy. Women don't like to be crazy because crazy is scary, right? Somebody can actually reject you, and that's uncomfortable. The third area of my life in disruption was, after selling my company, I spent 4 or 5 years embedded in very large companies with one question. If I could have 50 engineers go build something, why doesn't a company of 100,000 introduce 100 products a year? What happens? It's not because all of you are not incredibly smart, but something's broken in the system, right? That doesn't allow us to do that. So I embedded myself in the big companies. That got me to write my book, which I'll talk about, and ways for us to get through that faster. And then I was about to start my next company in the area of personalized experience-based IT, the new digital economy, when I spoke to IBM, and here I am. So that's my story of my life, and it's all about disruption. Next slide. So today, I have a little bit of a challenge in that there are two very different things we're going to talk about. One, we're going to talk about women, the voices of women, and disruption and innovation. That's going to be one area. Then I'm going to kind of jump into the technical world because a lot of us are technology women. And we need to talk about what's coming next in the digital economy, as well as with IoT. Okay? All right, let me talk to you about my journey in women in tech. So in 1999, I have to really thank WITI, because at a WITI conference, Anita Borg and I, we didn't know each other. We were at the conference. It was the cocktail hour. We were in line to get wine. We bumped into each other. That evolved into talking together that entire night. The week after that, we got together talking about an organization that has to be built to really talk about women in tech. That was the beginning of the Anita Borg Institute for Women in Technology in 2000. And along with me, two other board members, we founded the organization. It was housed at Xerox Park on Page Mill Road, and that's where the journey began. Some of you might have been to the Grace Hopper celebration. The first Grace Hopper celebration had 49 women. The last Grace Hopper celebration, I'm sorry, what is this? Yeah, rock on. I told you these guys are great. All right. Oh, right, this is not the mic. See how excited I got? All right, okay. So the last Grace Hopper that we had this last fall had close to 5,500 women from around the world, right? So, you know, what have I learned? I've learned that yes, we have to get together. There's a lot of great work we've done. But in 2015, we're sitting in this room and talking about statistics that are about the same statistics as they were then. In fact, they're worse because in 2000, we had a lot more women coming out with computer science degrees, right? So what I've learned is that we need to change the dialogue. Each of you are not just here because there was a conference and you decided to come. Each of you are here because you're a change agent, right? And we'll talk a little bit later about why. So the first thing about women is screw perfection, right? So my daughter was in 5th grade. She had a little computer science project, and she had to write the algorithm. So she did that at night, but as she did with all her girlfriends, they took it, they printed it, they bedazzled it, they drew pictures around it. It was the most beautiful piece of work. The next morning, the proud mom, because it was an event, I showed up. The girls lined up very nicely, waiting for the teacher to come to handle their beautiful homework. And they were all proud, waiting for that pat in the back. There were 4 computer stations set up. The guys ran in, threw their homework on the floor, ran to the monitors, picked the station, and they wouldn't leave. While these girls waited because they wanted to do it perfectly. In the workplace, in your lives, I really have to bet that you do things perfectly. So the decision of changing the world is actually to become a little bit less perfect. Give yourselves a break, right? Be a little bit gentler on yourselves because we're not perfect. So where did #WomenRoar come from? Well, I was sitting on a flight 2 weeks ago, and to my left, we'll leave them nameless, one of the biggest VCs in the Valley, fabulous guy, wonderful conversation. To the right of me, a woman whom I hadn't met before. And the VC was talking and telling me about how great he is and what he's done and how wonderful he is. Oh, it was great. Until I turned to my right and I introduced myself and the woman said, I'm just coming back from Harvard. I got an honorary PhD. I said, what an honor. Please tell me about yourself. And with a voice that was barely audible, she told me that she's a Nobel laureate in neuroscience. We only have 19 women laureates in the world. right? At that point, I asked her to raise her voice a little bit because the VC had now started, right? I mean, he was on this thing. He wasn't going to stop. And I finally had to say, let's have a conversation. So in my column, I really dedicated last week's column to really women having voices because it's not about accomplishing. If you're silent, you can't change anything. You can't have influence, right? At the same time, women sometimes have a lot of difficulty speaking up. So hopefully today we'll explore that a little bit. So then with my buddies at WITI, we said, hey, that's Women Roar. That's Roar. That's where this came from. All right, so now you know the history of where that came from. All right, disruptive. Remember this phone number. This is mine. I'm going to count to 5. You want to write it down? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, we'll come back to that. So here's the deal. Things having to do with us, we own this. It's up to us to change it. It's not up to our male boss. It's not up to HR. It's actually not even up to WITI as an organization. It's up to us. My column 2 weeks ago at the Post talked about what women are capable of doing, and I've been fascinated with Shonda Rhimes. Because prior to Shonda taking not just 1 or 2, but 3 of the top slots in network television, for the first time ever for 3 back-to-back series, a woman has never done that, ever. An African-American woman has never done that. She defined what could be done. By one simple thing, she went and she pushed to do it. So each of you, sitting in small companies, your own business, large companies, that's really where you can push this, right? So that's where this personal ownership comes up. So I invite you not to be waiting for somebody to do this for you, because it's never going to happen. So this is why I love women. Talent, creativity, work ethic, tolerance, drive, parallel processing, resilient, multidimensionality, intelligence, team building, team player, communication, empathy, community, genius, what-if potential, being the perfect mother, woman, daughter, sister, wife, nurturer, and wanting to be absolutely perfect in everything all the time. That's us, all right? That's what I love about women. And amazing, and I ran out of time and I started getting tired of typing because I do my presentations the night before after I've met a number of you yesterday and I was inspired about what I wanted to talk about. So that's what I love about women, about all these things that women portray. What I don't like about women is the silence. Silence is zero influence. Silence is no change, right? So when you choose to be silent in a meeting, when you choose not to say something because either you believe it's politically correct or you don't want what you call a battle or whatever it might be that you're not speaking, that's really the only upside of silence. Now, in a company, as it turns out, the issue of not having enough women is an issue that everybody is worried about. So you read in my article last week that when I start a meeting, and typically my meetings has at most 1 to 2 women at most. So in an average course of a week, between large companies, startups, I maybe interact with 2 women. At the same time, I'm interacting with hundreds of men. So in the meeting, I ask men to point out what's wrong in the room. Look around themselves. Create that consciousness, not in a derogatory way, but in a very genuine, authentic way. It is really boring being the only woman in the room. Seriously, right? And they don't want that either. So we'll talk later on why that matters. In your community, how you speak up and you're not silent. Networking. I really don't think women are networking effectively. Coming to WITI in your comfort zone, some of you having come here for 15 years, talking to the same people you know, in fact, emailing them to make sure they're here when you come, so that you're getting together again, that's not networking, right? So Wendy had some very good ideas. Be authentic, approach somebody, and tell them something about you that intrigues them. But going outside of your comfort zone to network is critical for all of us, for men, for women, right? So yeah, that does mean sometimes going out for a drink with someone to get to know them better and getting over some of our own mindsets that stop us. Tech conferences. For those who go to tech conferences, when you see something's wrong, turns out if you actually write an email to the owner of the conference, that you didn't like what you saw, but be proactive. Let them know about yourself, include your resume, tell them why you ought to be the speaker next year. You will immediately get a response. Or you can go to option B. Just say it's wrong, right? So make a choice. Do you want to live with the statistics or do you want to change the statistics? That's the decision that every one of you needs to make, right? And that's really about silence. The silence is there. We now have a global hashtag Women Roar. The article has now gone international. WITI is now being talked internationally, broadly. So be part of the dialogue, communicate, and use this as a way to connect up and do this. So here are some, look, there are no simple ways to do things, but here are just 4 ideas I want to share with you. 1, when you see something in a meeting or other, right there, be present, ask questions. Say, hey, does this seem right? Is there another way we could do this, right? That's number 1. Don't be silenced. The second one is make recommendations, but drive them. Don't just say, well, this is wrong, what are we going to do? Be part of changing it. Demand that change. The third is raise the awareness, not just with people in the room, but also their superiors and their superiors. And if you're in a startup, which most tech startups today have 0 women, that's really dangerous, right? Because that's where a lot of the talent pool is going to go. You need to be able to increase the awareness and be comfortable that you can have this dialogue. When I brought this up with a female at one point, she said she really didn't want to do this because she didn't want to focus the attention on her gender because that might minimize her technical capability in the audience, right? So be more secure, right? How many of you here have college degrees? Right on. That's who you are. You're there to do something, so have confidence in yourself to be able to speak up. Don't worry that that's going to take away from your credibility. In fact, I'll tell you one thing. You get a ton more respect if you bring it up because it shows your courage to talk about it, right? So just some ways that you can talk about it. Why bother? 1, I don't know about you, but I don't like being in that environment today. But I'm even more worried in what I see in the future. My daughter is coming out with a computer science degree. The companies she'd be looking at joining are now 100% men. If this doesn't change, the millennials, the young generation doesn't have any bias, but they're going to enter a world that's unusual. So it's upon us to sort of help change this, not just for ourselves. So for those of you in the audience who say, you know, this is not my stuff, if any of you have daughters and are thinking about them, some of us granddaughters eventually, that's kind of why we bother, right? Women need to learn to have more conviction other than confirmation. Wendy talked a little bit about this, right? It's not about sense of approval, but it's about the passion to push an idea through. So what does that mean? We've been raised to want approval, to want to do things that everybody is comfortable, right? Patricia yesterday used some good words of what we're called when we don't. The hell with it. That makes no difference, right? The moment that change happens is when us women begin to not worry about those adjectives that define us. So again, exercise that choice. And, you know, don't give a damn. It just doesn't matter. Just proceed. Women in tech, it's difficult. I'm going to talk about a few dimensions of women in tech. If you're an entrepreneur and you're starting a company, there is without a doubt an issue that it's more difficult for women. It's more difficult for first-time women CEOs than first-time male CEOs. So it is something that is difficult, but it's changing nowhere close to the rate that it needs to be changed. Why? Because venture capital firms are majority men, with very few women there. Now, that doesn't mean they're biased. I think the part that's missing is that conviction. And the one thing that's very difficult for women is to get rejection. How many people love rejection? Seriously. You know, rejection actually means you're on a path that's bothering somebody, which means that there's something you're saying that's of essence, because it wouldn't elicit the reaction otherwise. Think about it. Otherwise, the person would be, they wouldn't care. They would just go on, right? But when they reject you, when they have that passionate thing, you've hit a nerve, bank on that, use it, love it. In companies, it becomes a lot more difficult because in big companies, the layers as you go up become more and more and more male, right? So if you want to get a leadership position in a company, you have to try harder. Fact is, companies want that. I think Satya did a favor to all of us last year with what he said about women and karma, right? It really grew the awareness of the world around women and what women should get. But I really don't think it's even about Satya. It's about you, it's about me, it's the expectation that you're going to set in your company. What's going to happen if the 50% workforce of a company begins to not accept what's wrong, right? That's where change comes about. Just one second. All right. So now we're going to digress into another world. So here's all the stuff about women that I think I wanted to share with you. And there's a chapter in my book that talks about it. But one of my biggest difficulties when I was running my company was finding women to come and drive things in my company. I had a disruptive, innovative company. And one of the things that I had to do as a female CEO is I would go to MIT and Harvard and Berkeley. I would post my job opening. I would hang around the computer science department. I would go in and buy food for the class, and I would say, I'm a woman CEO looking for women. I reached 40% women engineers in my company. So it can be done, right? So thank you. Very proud of that. So it can be done, and part of what you could do is instead of expecting HR to miraculously do this for you, which is not going to happen, go to HR and try this. Say that, hey, I'd like to be part of going to the universities with you. I want to be part of the recruiting. If you're coming from a college that you want to go back, your alma mater, go to the computer science classes. Some pretty major magic happens if you show up and you talk to people. You intrigue these women. Sometimes they don't even know the company is run by a woman or that your group wants to have more women, right? So these are some of the things that you could do. Now sort of looking at disruptive innovation, and this is what two terms that have been used a lot, but I want to stop and have everybody think about that. One is disruptive, which is change, and innovation, which is something new. So can innovation happen without disruption? Yeah, exactly. So we came up with the term, right? But it really is one of very, very connected. So when you talk about disruptive innovation, we have a lot of people here from large companies, various industries. Large companies, it's very, very difficult, right? Because you're chartered to run a product line that generates X amount of revenue. There's a lot of discomfort to shake things up, break things apart. Why? Because the revenue is not going to be there. And we'll look at some interesting examples together. But when you think about disruption, I want you to think about imagination. Actually, I want you to think about when is the last time you thought about imagine. You get up in the morning, you have so much to do, you're constantly inundated with your devices, you go to work, you get stuff done, you get home. Do you even have time to think about imagining something in technology? So to innovate at anything that you're doing, you need to take that time. Now there's the proverb, Google gives people 20% time for imagine time. That's good. But if you are interested in innovating, if any of you want to have startups, if you want to change stuff in your company, imagination is very, very important. Imagination has no boundaries. There's no how-to book. It better be pretty wacky. So get comfortable for it to be very crazy. And permission, give yourself the permission to think about that. So I'm not sure what Apple would have been had Steve Jobs said, I'm going to do things like everybody else, versus when you push the envelope. So then ask yourself, why is that not happening in a lot of companies? So just an interesting question. Inspiring is important. In fact, I see it here. Inspire is one of the WITI taglines. When is the last time you inspired yourself? When is the last time you inspired your team? You drive your team, but do you inspire them? Do they think of you as inspiring? Any of you who are managers, directors, executives, that is first and foremost your biggest job to do, is to inspire your team. I don't see a lot of it. It really worries me. Driving a team is not inspiring a team. Just a thought. And thinking about doing the impossible. So if you're embarking on doing something in disruptive innovation, people are going to say it's very difficult, you can't do it, but part of it is to get there. crazy is great. When you go to do disruptive innovation, you're going to get two things. Skepticism, because it's easy and cheap, right? Doesn't cost anything for me to disagree with you, right? Ignore that one. Intimidation, right? Intimidation is the way that I can shut off the conversation. Be ready for it, ignore it, right? Don't give the chance for the person who's intimidating you. You are all incredibly talented. If I sat with you with 1 hour, I bet you we would come up with an absolute 1 page of possibilities. Ideas that you have in your mind, right? But those ideas get shut off. How many of those ideas ever get to your company? Right? So it's almost like choking, suffocating, right? So just don't give those two things. When you see it, we're going to talk about them, just ignore it. Go ahead and disrupt. And disruption's not chaos, by the way. It is the ingredient for innovation. And my tagline in my company since 2000, all of my websites has been disrupt, innovate, lead. Because those three go together. If you don't disrupt, you don't innovate, it's very difficult to go and lead in anything. These are my URLs, or just go to lindabernardi.com. But there are a lot of places that you can talk to me. And there was the calling thing for later. Okay, so now, what do these companies have in common? Okay, BlackBerry, Nokia, Kodak, Borders. All right, so what? They're not there. Why? Because of one thing, they resisted disruption, right? So when I was sitting with Nokia, when Apple was coming out with the Apple Store, Nokia said, we dominate the field. We really don't need to worry about that. BlackBerry said, our security model is such that no enterprise is ever going to stop using us, all right? So that took them. Borders said, it really doesn't matter because really just some people are going to buy it online. The rest are going to come into the store. Not. And Kodak could have owned Instagram. So the only absolute certain thing that your company is going to face if you avoid disruption is you're going to fail. Get that message up the chain, right? Particularly now because pressure in business isn't coming from one industry, from all industries. Look at the number of industries that Apple is threatening. Look at the number of industries that Amazon is threatening, right? So if your business is one that is resistant, that's a problem. I put USPS in there because I'm honestly having a hard time with the following statement from the United States Postal Service Commissioner. He said, I quote, "Internet is just a fad. Our business is going to go on," all right? And not so long ago, by the way. All right, so I guess he missed the fax, the internet, email, and everything else, right? Resistance is extremely common. We need to, this is a much longer session, but a few things that I want to share with you is, you need to break your habit loops. By the way, resistance isn't just in everybody else in your company, it's in you. You know why? Because you get used to doing something, you get really good at it, you don't want to change because it goes back to women not wanting to be imperfect. Because what if I fail? Playing outside of your comfort zone. And here are some challenges in entrepreneurism, whether you're a startup entrepreneur or you're doing entrepreneurism in your big company. Fear of failure, cultural barriers, risk intolerance, skepticism, access to capital, agility, flexibility. The fact that you have to sell your vision all the time, all the time. Anytime you see Bill Gates today, he still has something in his pocket he wants to show you. It is relentless. And the fact that vision and inspiration have to be there before you get a product. When we're in big companies, and I'm in a big company right now, a pretty big one, there are a lot of this stuff that you have to build, but partly you're facing a cultural shift. So I decided that after about 3 years of facing these things, we've got to put this stuff in a book. We've got to move through the dialogue. I identified the 5 major stages of resistance just so I could move it forward. And it was interesting because my publishers said, you know, the word provoke, unsettling. I think we need to change that. And then they said, culture of disruption seems like a very uncomfortable thing. Enterprises are absolutely not going to like it, right? So let's just say they didn't agree with me. But being true to the concept of conviction versus confirmation, I published a book anyways. And I'm glad to say that disruption is the biggest thing facing enterprises, and this is my tagline, culture of disruption. So over the last 5 years, talking to companies around the world, there are tens of thousands of people that are now deploying these methodologies, creating internal cultures of change and becoming comfortable with that. So let me walk you through the 5 stages of resistance very, very quickly. And this is all in the book, if you get a chance to glance at it. So when you're introducing a disruption in your company, or you're going out there to start a new thing, a brand new thing, the first thing you're absolutely going to meet is anger and denial, right? The absolute first thing, because that's touching on a lot of toes. People are uncomfortable. As an example, take cloud computing, right? What happened when Salesforce came out with cloud computing? Every major company said it was a fad and resisted it. Who are the last companies that adopted cloud computing? Are the world's largest companies. Because it was anger and denial because it threatened the revenue line. So if I close my eyes, close my ears, it didn't happen. Well, unfortunately, it's part of your job, if you do want to push it forward, to help them get to the next beautiful stage, which is rejection. So you take this greatest idea to your company, you get into the meeting, you're absolutely certain you've got to go do this. This is a market you should create. And somebody says no. I want you to be able to move through that, to be able to work that rejection into something that the person says, this is something that I really ought to look at, right? And these are inevitable, by the way. So I went and pitched my idea, my company, to maybe 70 or 75 venture capitalists, got rejected from every one of them. Well, the first reaction was anger and denial. You're crazy, it's never going to happen, go away. The other ones said flat out, we're not going to invest. That's, you just continue and you succeed. Until eventually recognition happens, right? Recognition is the point of panic in a company. Oh my God, cloud is happening, what am I going to do, right? What is the first thing people do when they recognize and they're in panic? They go buy a company, right? So, because that's the fastest way for me to get stuff in, but how many of you have been in your companies when you've done an acquisition and have been pissed off because you weren't involved in the conversation, right? If these aren't done right, the founders leave, the technology stays, the culture doesn't work. So it's an important thing, but we've got to plan it and think about it. So eventually recognition leads to inspiration. Oh my God, I'm in cloud, now cloud is my biggest business, right? So now I'm going to inspire and get things done, onto acceptance and action. These 5 stages happen with different people at different times. So be comfortable that just because somebody's rejecting you doesn't mean that you have to walk away. It's not adversarial. Be able to disagree, have a drink, and continue talking about it. And understand that people will be at different stages. I still have clients that are from my previous business, in the anger and denial stage. But we have some of the best conversations. There's still hope. And at the fundamental core of this is the culture of disruption. This is the culture that moves us forward. And this builds into the ecosystem of disruption. These are, of course, big sections in the book that describe all of this. But I put this up because there was one section of the ecosystem that I'm very interested to talk to you, and that is the employee that you see on the right side. Typically, a company has 99.9% would fall into the employee pool. Interestingly, that 99.9% often feel they have no choice in where the company goes. Now that's fascinating, right? The top 5 people, honestly, aren't going to take us there. It's everybody else that's going to take us there. And that happens by having a culture and working together. So, let me just go back. So, this was what I wanted to cover with you to help you move through these things. And speaking of vulnerability, as Wendy said, these are tough things. They become exponentially harder for women to do. When you're sitting in a room as a single woman with 10 senior executives and you have to push an idea through. It's like bulldozing through concrete, right? So it's not easy, but that's what we need to do. So jumping to the third section of the talk, where I promised to talk to you about what is shifting in technology, that being my day job, is what we've seen over the last 30 years. We went from hardware, software, large enterprise stuff. Then we went into client server. All of you have been there. Then from there, we said, well, we're going to open it up. We're going to virtualize. Then we went into open source. Then we said, okay, we're going to give people PCs and let them run some things here, some things there, while IT hugely protected the firewall, right? And then we battled to be able to get stuff in and out of a firewall. And then two pivotal things happened. One, Salesforce came out and did two things. Developed something that didn't have to run behind the firewall, and developed something on the cloud that nobody believed could be done because it was sales data. And that broke all the paradigms that we need to put stuff behind the firewall. And the other thing that happened is, I don't know if you know, but about 7 years ago, 4 Amazon developers decided to take a little bit of excess capacity that they had and open it up on a Saturday. I live in Mercer Island, Washington. That morning, we were having coffee, myself and those 4 people. It was a cute experiment, right? Just open it up, see what happens. Are people ever going to get into somebody else's, server and run it? Would this work? How would it work? By midnight, it had crashed. That was the genesis of elastic computing. That's what Amazon did. So by allowing you to be able to take your stuff on servers that you don't have to own, it completely changed how things were going to be developed. Now we can have applications developed by anyone, anywhere, consumable by anyone, anywhere, right? So you can develop stuff, put it on the App Store, you can develop it, put it on Amazon. It began to shift. And the biggest next shift that happened was in the area of data. So data about you is now what drives businesses. It's not IT. IT is evolving. So today, your sensors on your body, in your car, in your home, your social media, your buying patterns, you are what's pushing the future of IT. So these are some massive shifts, which is taking us from the old paradigm of IT into what I call experience-based or personalized IT, consumer-based IT. So one of the biggest business opportunities for tech, women or men, is data science, because there is going to be so much data that we need to understand. Because a business today, whether it's your bank, your insurance company, your hotel, your airline, your doctor, your consumer product company, your hair color company, everybody wants to reach you, understand you, talk to you at that moment. So it's probably the most exciting tsunami of shift that I've seen. I encourage you to get part of this shift. If you want to play in IT or technology, this is a huge next step. This is causing a huge digital data economy, an economy that is driven by IT, so data. So you're going to hear that. A section of that data is what's called Internet of Things or IoT data, typically referred to devices or things that emit data that we're trying to understand. IoT is a part of this deluge of data that's going to happen, right? So that's really where the shift is. And so to give you an example, a story, think about you're running an app in this personalized IT environment. I'm going to take a hypothetical example that you're talking to your hotel, and you're taking a trip, and that's generating an inquiry. I'm coming to New York, right? So today, if I'm talking to my hotel, I run an app that doesn't really know me. In my world, I immediately get an answer that says, "Hello, Linda, thank you for coming to New York. I know that you like a series of activities. You go to that salon, you do this, you like this food," right? They understand me, and they're going to cater things to me. What's happening in the background on the right is that actually is hitting a lot of internal databases, legacy engines, analytics. But you're standing there at that moment in time, you're expecting a much more personalized interaction. The hotel at that time is connecting you to your car service, your restaurant, your theater, your hair salon. Because it's raining in New York, I'd like to have an umbrella in my hotel room. Because it's going to be really cold, I'd like a jacket. But I don't want to do any of that. All of this can be done, right? And once I get that experience back, you see in the social circle, if I'm really happy, I then send that happiness across my social channels, which means thousands of other people start running this. That means the amount of data is in the trillions, right? And that creates an economy that's hugely data intensive, and everybody wins because all businesses that run on the system are going to win. The consumer is happy. So keeping the consumer happy is the biggest thing that we're trying to do in Uber personalization. And so my journey to IBM was, this is the world I was involved in. I was going to go build a company and start doing this. IBM said, hey, this is where we ought to go as well. So I joined IBM. And can the women from IBM stand up here? Right on. Woo! I am so proud. We have 75 women here from IBM. So one of the reasons I joined IBM is the culture. Is just, I mean, I have goosebumps, right? I mean, a culture that supports, that recognizes not just these events, but change is something that we need to go and embrace. So my journey to IBM was to come here and do some of this stuff that is going to be highly disruptive. And that's the journey that we are on. And it's unfortunately chewing the bottom part of the slide, but what you should be seeing is IBM Intelligent Cloud. More of this you will hear very soon, as well as IBM Intelligent IoT, which is the ways that we're going to completely change IT and allow you to get much closer to that personalized world. So by the way, when I was at L'Oreal, I was explaining to the CEO that in my ideal world, some of us women color our hair, okay? So in my ideal world, I'm standing in front of a color and they're like 15 shades of brown, and I have no idea what it is. In my world, I want to be able to click and put the camera on what I'm buying, put the camera on my face, and immediately get a recommendation exactly what that color ought to be. Have that also diagnose the chemistry of my hair so that I know which of the 15,000 conditioners to buy. And by the way, before I even get out of the store, I want to see my 15% discount that I can use, and I want to have an experience that I can share. That's my vision of the future. You would want to know that almost every enterprise in the world wants to do that for you. So with that, call me. So I promised I would say this. All right, I network and work with a lot of women on a lot of different things. This will allow us to connect. You'll figure out what to do when you get on. There's going to be groups that we're going to have different dialogues, technology discussions, guest speakers, other things. So if you want to connect, or go to Twitter or any other way, I would love to talk to you. And I encourage you to find your voices. You all have it. If nothing else, when you leave WITI, just find it. Go home and scream at something, yell, enjoy, and roar and be part of Women in Roar, the dialogue. Thank you very much. So we are out of time. Do we have time for questions? Yeah.
Hi, Kristen from PTC. We're a global software company. We're in the IoT space. And as a recruiter in the IoT space, given how new and cutting edge the technology is, I was wondering what type of qualities, like a leader like yourself in the IoT space, should I be looking for?
So there are obviously the technical qualities you would look for, but I would suggest looking for people that think out of the box, because IoT hasn't yet been defined, right? So we need to figure out, and people that can take that and not just develop application, but help you think what kinds of applications you can develop. Hopefully it's not a man or a woman issue, but really people that can be very creative in their thinking. All right. Yep.
Hi, Laura DiDio from Strategy Analytics. You talked a lot about provoking and disrupting. What did you do at different parts at times in your career when you provoked and disrupted and it became personal to, on the other side, to push back? How did you handle that? Because women do get told that they're bitches, they're intimidating, troublemakers, etc. And because we are in a male-dominated profession, that works against you. So how did you personally handle that?
So I think for me, to be quite honest in this audience, the question is, how do you handle when this becomes personal, both for you and the other people, right? Because a reaction when you are rejected, resisted, is the easy one is to walk away, right? Walk away, pretend I never saw that person. So for me, it hasn't been a gender or a person issue, it's the passion. I honestly, trust me, I get frustrated a lot because I have to think of other ways. But if I have the passion, it has never gotten to the point where I have to stop. right? Because if I am going to stop and that's the only way I can handle it, probably that wasn't the thing I had to do. Does that answer your question?
Not exactly.
Okay.
Okay, now I was looking for, because women do encounter a lot of bias and a lot of gender discrimination still, and it persists. So what do you do if you've ever been in a situation where the men gang up on you and then you get isolated or put aside? Or hasn't that happened to you?
Well, you know, maybe because I actually solicit to be in those environments, right? I can't say that I have been in that environment. Somebody pointed out, a male colleague pointed out that discrimination is not just with women. It happens to different cultures. And he reminded me that if I'm an Indian man in a room of all white men, I don't feel comfortable having a voice. So that was really a good wake-up call for me to realize that intimidation happens to everybody. In fact, people who intimidate are pretty much blanket intimidators. They tend to intimidate everybody. But I think the clicks are there, and maybe my strategy has been to try to force into that and eventually change the dialogue. A different perspective, perhaps. So you'll read more of that in the book. It's described, yeah. Any other questions? Yes? Is there another mic?
Yeah, let's go to the audience mics if we can. Thanks, guys.
Hi, my name's Rita Amami, FICO. We talked a lot about men's behaviors versus women's behaviors. Men network, women make friends. Is change going to come from women acting more like men, or women continuing to act like women?
I think, honestly, women are authentic. Women are very strong. I forgot to mention another thing I don't like about us women, is we don't help each other. Okay? So I'll tell you, for those of us who have mentors, you don't have to raise your hand. How many of your mentors are men? Oh, well, there you go. So the point is, I don't think we need to be like men. We need to be who we are. But for whatever reason, we get really hung up in protecting who we are and what we're doing. We don't want to share the turf. And in fact, less help is done by women for women, contrary to the fact that we all gather here, kumbaya, but in the real world, we're not helping each other. So that's the honest truth.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Yes. What an interesting question. Profound. So the question is, how does being a yogi sort of reflect, is that contrary to an extroverted, passionate behavior? Complementary. Yeah. Yeah. So in 1 year of my life, I took a year and spent it in the ashrams in India. I studied Sanskrit. I became yogi. I teach yoga around the world. It has brought the balance. So you might laugh, but a lot of the ways that I deal with situations is by reaching deep in and trying to understand. I might start a board of directors meeting having people take off their shoes, right? I mean, you want to see some men act really funky. I don't know why, but ask them to take off their shoes. They're very strange about it. Then do the next thing, which is close your eyes. Whoa. And then getting them into meditation. So that's actually, for me, it has been the way to try to understand beyond, because in yoga, you have to go beyond, right? You have to go beyond what you see. And you also realize in yoga, there is no perfection. Because whenever you think you're good, there's somebody better and better. And in fact, then the ultimate nirvana is you realize it's not about perfection. It's about finding your soul. So it's been very, very helpful. Thank you for a great question. Thanks.